Hi, all lovely listeners, and welcome to the Europe Elects podcast for our April 2026 episode that we're calling Coalitions Galore Except in Hungary. I'm Gabriel, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host and friend Javid. Hi, Javid, how are you?
Hi, Gabriel. I'm doing all right. How about you?
Yeah, very, very good. So much for us to talk about. It's been a very sort of intense, squeezed-in period of elections throughout March and April, all around Europe, from Hungary to Slovenia, Denmark, etc. So we're going to talk through the elections that have happened and analyse the results and make sure that all of our listeners have all the details that they need going forward. We'll also touch upon an Italian referendum and state elections in Germany. We have lots more coming up throughout April, May, June as well in terms of elections. I know there's a campaign happening right now in Bulgaria. You probably will have results when listening to this. So we'll discuss that in our next episode because that's very exciting as well. But I think, Javid, do you want to get us started with will be the most sort of geopolitically important long-term election result of this year in Europe?
So, of course, we had the Hungarian elections last Sunday. On 12th of April 2026, Hungarians voted to deny Orban an unprecedented fifth term in the office. Instead, the opposition, led by Péter Magyar and his TISA party, won 138, but now with the newest updates, 140 seats out of the 199 of the Hungarian National Assembly, and just getting 52% of the vote. Some of the votes from abroad are still getting counted. Fidesz has won 39% of the vote and only has, as far as I know right now, 54 seats. They lost 15 seats of the vote compared to 2022 and 79 seats, more than 18 right now. To some commentators' surprise, Orban conceded and respected the result. A small far-right party, Mi Hazánk, Our Homeland, they won 6 seats with the 6% of the vote. Impact, crucially, TISA has won over 2/3 of the seats in the assembly. That gives him the power to rewrite the constitution. Orban had previously used his supermajority to introduce laws which entrenched Fidesz control of judiciary, introduced a biased electoral system. TISA should be able to undo these constitutional changes, allowing Hungary to unlock 17 billion of EU funds, which is worth of 10% of its GDP. These funds had been frozen due to concerns about democratic backsliding and the rule of law. The electoral system is two-part system, half of it which is a majoritarian election system introduced by Orban. It has backfired as TISA was able to convert its solid electoral support into a landslide legislative victory. Hungary elects 93 members of the parliament on the national party list, where seats are allocated proportionally to parties who receive more than 5% of the vote. Hungary also elects 106 members who are elected to represent single constituencies according to first past the post. Unlike other mixed member systems such as Germany's, seats at the national list are not allocated to ensure that the final assembly represents the list vote. This enables parties like in another first past the post systems to win large majorities on relatively small vote shares. TISA has won roughly 92 constituency seats compared to Fidesz's 13. Some commentators argue that Fidesz's gerrymandering backfired and became a dummy mander. Arguably, this happened when Fidesz cracking liberal voters in urban cities. This meant they were included in otherwise conservative districts, that TISA was able to win thanks to the support of those liberal urban voters. Fidesz's gerrymander of 2 seats in Fejér County proved to be ineffective. However, TISA's strong support outside of Budapest makes it difficult to draw electoral districts where Fidesz would win. Fidesz still had a structural advantage, as discussed in the previous episode, due to the fact that rural voters are overrepresented since bigger cities have bigger constituencies, population-wise. In his victory speech, Péter Magyar has continued to criticize the Hungarian government's corruption and asked Fidesz-appointed officials, including the president, to resign. Magyar stressed that his government, unlike Fidesz's, would be accountable. He held a 3-hour press conference the day after his win to highlight this. Magyar characterized his victory as a victory for the EU and NATO. Magyar struck a patriotic tone, criticizing Orban's administration and comparing his election victory to other Hungarian revolutions of 1848 and 1956 against oppressive governments who tried to suppress national movements. He also sought to express an inclusive nationalism, claiming he understood the political differences in Hungary. His policy views on other social issues such as LGBT rights seem unclear, while he seems comfortable maintaining Hungary's strict anti-abortion laws. The international reaction was the following. Fidesz's loss was celebrated by most European politicians, including President of the EU Commission Ursula von der Leyen. Donald Tusk tweeted in celebration of Tisa's victory, Ruski Kaza, Russians go home. Meanwhile, Meloni tweeted congratulations but called Orban a friend. The Kremlin, meanwhile, initially claimed that they respected the result, but they later labeled Hungary an unfriendly country. The reasons for this victory were the following. Analysts and Magyar have attributed multiple reasons to Fidesz's defeat. First of all, a weak economy in part caused by Fidesz's corruption. A view that Hungary had become a Russian vassal state. It was revealed that a Hungarian foreign minister was calling Russia during EU meetings. The Hungarian army captain also revealed that the army was very critical of the government's pro-Russian policy, as well as the decision to give Orban's son a prestigious role within the military despite his lack of qualifications for the job. Another reason is the failure for Fidesz to deliver good public services. Magyar focuses campaign speeches on improving pensions, healthcare and education. Another reason is the view that the justice system had become corrupt. During the campaign, it was revealed how the Hungarian government had investigated 2 TISA IT workers on the alleged possession of child sexual abuse material. No evidence was found, and it seems that the operation was politically motivated. The original scandal that led Peter Magyar to leave Fidesz also cost them support. Magyar had visited 6 Hungarian towns every day during the election campaign, resulting in over 700 visits across the country across the last 2 years.
Very thrilling campaign to watch, and yeah, I guess there'll be a lot of political science theses and research and writings on the sort of blowback of the electoral rules, etc., against Orban. Very interesting, and yeah, it will be something to watch long term, the impacts of this, and obviously what Fidesz and Orban choose to do next. Another big electoral event this spring, or late winter, I would say, were the local elections in France. So on the 15th and 22nd of March, nearly 70 million people in France voted in these local or municipal elections, choosing councillors across roughly 35,000 communes. France has a very interesting system of local government. They're divided entirely into these communes, which vary in size massively. Some have like 0 to 10 permanent residents, while cities like Paris have like a more complex system with both a single commune ruling the whole city and then sort of sub-municipalities within that. Unlike some countries, all local elections in France take place the same day at the same time. So this meant that every commune in France was up for election this year. The system mirrors France's legislative elections now, which is a 2-round vote where the leading list receives a majority bonus in council seats. And then between rounds, parties can merge lists to avoid splitting the vote, etc. You need 10% in the first round to be eligible to go into the second round. And then there's this very exciting period between round 1 and round 2 when different local branches of parties and lists make different strategic decisions of who to back and who to become allies with, etc. It was interesting to watch this here, obviously, because we are just 1 year away from the next presidential elections in France that Emmanuel Macron cannot run in again. People are looking at this to see what the political temperature is across the country. So in terms of the national picture of the results in the end, across municipalities with more than 3,500 residents, which is 100,000 council seats, which is quite mad, the biggest gains came from the so-called miscellaneous right, which won 32,869 seats, which is a sharp increase. But this comes with an important caveat that the main centre-right party, Les Républicains, which used to be the party of government in France until, I guess now, 15 years ago, they actually lost seats nationally. The miscellaneous left came second with just over 19,000 seats, which is a notable drop for them. The centre bloc came third, gaining more than 3,500 seats overall, which you can see that is a massive gap to the other ones. Renaissance, which is the party of President Macron, picked up a few cities like Bordeaux and Annecy from the Greens, so that was seen as a success. But overall, they're a pretty weak force still looking nationally. And they also didn't contest as many seats as the other major parties did. The National Rally, so the far-right nationalist party in France, increased its presence to 2,395 seats, which is up significantly, but that result for them was definitely seen as mixed. I think overall the results were quite interesting because they were so mixed, so there was no clear massive winner or massive loser, and a lot of following debate about what this means for next year, very far from being straightforward. In terms of key local battles that got national and international attention and that are of consequence for French politics going forward, in Le Havre, former Prime Minister Edouard Philippe was re-elected mayor with 48% of the vote. He had tied this victory to a potential 2027 presidential run under his Horizon party, which is another sort of centrist party that quite often allies either with Macron or with the old centre-right Républicains across the country. Meanwhile, François Barrault, who is another liberal politician, narrowly lost the mayoralty of the city of Pau to the Socialist Party. So you can sort of see that as Philippe gaining strength in terms of becoming the successor to Macron to be the centrist liberal candidate next year. In Nice, in the southeast of France, Éric Ciotti, who's formerly Républicain, won the mayoralty after aligning himself with the National Rally, highlighting ongoing fractures on the right, but also, I guess, a clever strategy from him to sort of co-opt the National Rally in the city of Nice to be able to keep hold of power. Elsewhere, where centre-right parties refused to cooperate with the far-right, for example, in Nîmes, the left was able to come through as part of that. In Marseille, the socialists held off a strong National Rally challenge, but Marseille, which is the second city of France, remains run by the socialists. Obviously, as in any sort of local elections, a lot of attention was also put on the capital city of Paris. In Paris, the socialists retained control of the mayoralty after Anne Hidalgo chose to not run for a third term as mayor. She's had a controversial tenure, I'd say, particularly due to policies seen as anti-motorist, including the pedestrianisation of large parts of the city. Obviously, a lot of people love that, and it's a kind of visible change that you can see from when she took over, but it's been the big contentious sort of battleground against both the centre-right and the far-right in France. The first round of the vote in Paris was highly fragmented, with candidates from across the political spectrum qualifying for the runoff. When it came to the second round on the day, both the centrist and far-right candidates stepped aside to consolidate the conservative vote against the Socialist Party. Calls were made for the far left to do the same to support the socialists, but they refused. And also the socialist candidate, Emmanuel Grégoire, also declined to merge with the sort of socialist far-left La France Insoumise. That decision paid off for him quite substantially. He won with 50% of the vote, while France Insoumise managed just 8%. His main rival, Rachida Dati, who became the de facto right-wing candidate, finished on 41.5%, losing her second bid to become mayor. This sort of dynamic in Paris that was also seen in some other cities across France has led to a lot of tensions on the left side of politics going into next year. There's basically an emerging debate about whether cordon sanitaire, that has traditionally been used against the far right in France, whether the Socialist Party and Liberal parties should also apply that to the far left. Critics argue that under Jean-Luc Mélenchon, elements of La France Insoumise have become too controversial for broader alliances. This debate intensified in France following the killing of Quentin Derenc in February 2026, which was linked to far-left militants associated with a group called the Young Guard that has been connected and campaigned with LFI. So there was a sort of street fight that led to this Derenc, a guy getting killed, tragically. Electorally, as I said again, the picture is very mixed, so you can sort of make of it what you will. In cities like Toulouse and Limoges, socialists did back France Insoumise candidates. In others like Clermont-Ferrand and Brest, the far left decided to step aside for more moderate figures. But in both of those cases, the left lost to the right. So the Socialist Party, it seems, is more and more coming to the conclusion that the best way to try and beat right-wing candidates is actually to stand on their own or with some other alliances with smaller parties and not get involved with France Insoumise. Although some cities there were still successes, green left alliances managed to win in cities like Grenoble and Lyon, which is a big university town with a slightly different sort of makeup of progressive voters. That summarizes the French local elections. As I said, we're now entering sort of campaign year in France with there'll be lots of news and lots of polling on how that will go. And it's also worth saying that it's an interesting situation in France where the National Rally polls very well nationally, and I think is still, you can say, the front runners going into next year. But their sort of local elections and their local representation is still not matching the sort of legacy parties for these institutional reasons. So I would be careful to sort of extrapolate too much on like their result in this election to what's likely to happen in a national race next year. But yeah, very interesting to follow, and we'll have to wait and see what all these parties decide to do. Now we head eastwards from France to Slovenia that had national elections. Javid.
Yes, on the day when we were recording our previous episode on March 22nd, 2026, which also happens to be Sunday, Slovenia held its general election. The previous government was led by Robert Golob, the centre's prime minister. The government parties were from the center and center-left, comprising the Freedom Movement, Social Democrats and the left. Golob's government has come under fire over the last 4 years due to a myriad of corruption concerns and party infighting. Golob aimed to surmount this before the March elections by consolidating with center-left parties to create a strong center-left bloc, but most parties rejected his request. Polling indicated that the center-right to right-wing SDS was slightly in the lead, with the Freedom Movement a few points behind. The Europe-Elects poll on average indicated that overperformances by center-left Social Democrats and the Green-Left pre-election coalition, the Left plus Vesna, would come at a loss for the Freedom Movement. Results: 46 seats are needed for a majority. Freedom Movement became the biggest party with 29 seats. SDS became the second party with 28 seats. This gap of less than 1% between the top two parties is the lowest ever in Slovenian history. A right-wing coalition consisting of New Slovenia, the Slovenian People's Party and Focus won 9 seats. Social Democrats won 6 seats, Democrats 6 seats, and the Left plus Vesna 5 seats. And the right-wing Resnica Citizens Movement has gained 5 seats. According to exit polls, demographics were split. Female, older and higher educated voters were more likely to vote for the Freedom Movement. Younger voters were more likely to vote for Resnica Citizens Movement compared to older voters. Younger voters were most likely to vote for SDS. And as for the regions, the Freedom Movement performed strongly in Ljubljana and Postojna. The margins in most urban areas were nevertheless close between the Freedom Movement and the SDS. In the aftermath, the leader of Resnica stated that he would not join a right-wing bloc led by Janez Janša, who is the leader of SDS. Prime Minister Golob tried to create a unity coalition with all parties except SDS. This call was rejected by parties on the right, which declined joining in a coalition consisting of the left. A coalition was formed by NSI from the European People's Party, Resnica and Democrats, with the aim of collectively bargaining for a snap election or for portfolio allocations. In response to the NSI coalition, Golob aimed to negotiate an agreement in line with his earlier unity proposal, which gave them cabinet positions, but this was quickly rejected. This rejected proposals included the Left and Social Democrats, which would have an equal number of portfolios as the Democrats. Speaker election: the leader of Resnica, Zoran Stevanovic, was elected speaker, backed by SDS and the NSI-led coalition. The Left and Social Democrats did not vote, while the Freedom Movement voted against. The current status: the president, Nataša Pirc-Musar, has 30 days to nominate a formateur. There's currently a stalemate, with elements who experts have deemed to be populist, such as Russophilic Stefanovic, occupying the role of speaker.
We'll have to wait and see what the outcome is there. Still unclear. As far as I'm aware, it might have changed when you all hear this, but still an interesting result in Slovenia. Another small European country, if we just head up north, towards my neck of the woods originally, Denmark had snap elections, which is always exciting for us polling and election nerds when that happens. To recap, Denmark has been governed and is still, as of now, governed by a centrist cross-bloc coalition led by Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen. Her party, the Social Democrats, governs alongside Venstre and moderates. Venstre is the old traditional centre-right party in Denmark, which usually is grouped with liberal parties across Europe, and moderates is a relatively new liberal conservative party headed by previous Prime Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen. This is quite an unusual alliance if you look across most of Europe, I guess Germany being an exception, given that it's a centre-left to centre-right coalition, as I mentioned. So why did Mette Frederiksen call these elections? So you have to sort of look at it in two periods, I'd say. So before the end of last year, her party, the Social Democrats, were very much on the back foot. They suffered heavy losses in local elections last year, including in Copenhagen, where they lost power. That had been a stronghold for many, many decades. But her position and the position of the government changed as a result of Donald Trump's comments and sort of changed rhetorics around Greenland sovereignty, which feels like so long ago because so much has happened in the world, but that was just 3 months ago or so. Those remarks, obviously related to Denmark's sovereignty, triggered a rally around the flag effect in Denmark. The Social Democrats party surged in the polls, as did the moderates in particular, because Lars Løkke Rasmussen is the foreign secretary in Denmark. And then Frederiksen essentially said, this is our chance during this period when there is slightly more positive feeling towards us to capitalize on this and run a sort of campaign that's centered around competence foreign policy and sort of uniting Europe. To go back to some of the main players then, the Social Democrats have been in power since 2019 for a relatively long time by European standards, not Hungarian standards, but European standards. They're economically left-leaning, but famously they're much more conservative on immigration and social issues than a lot of their sister parties across Europe. They went into the election sort of expecting a clear plurality, meaning being the largest party, even though they have seen a pretty substantial decline over time. Meanwhile, the Green Left has been gaining ground in opposition, particularly after strong local election results last year, and also increased visibility around foreign policy issues. Venstre, the traditional centre-right party that's now part of the government, has really struggled in recent years and also saw heavy local election losses. So they've sort of had a similar fate to the Républicains in France or something like that, where they used to be the sort of natural main right-wing party with like a significant share of the vote, and they've become, at the national level, much more small and similar in size to a lot of these other parties that are relatively newer. So we're talking being, 10, 20, 30 years old rather than 100 plus years old. On the right, the Liberal Alliance and the Danish People Party have both been gaining support, particularly on more conservative and anti-immigration platforms, as you might guess. And the moderates, who were founded in 2022 that I mentioned, have this sort of explicit aim of being kingmakers in Danish politics, which is what they found themselves in after the last elections. They've really struggled in the polls since then. But again, as part of this sort of refocusing on foreign policy and the popularity of Lars Løkke Rasmussen, you were seeing that increase slightly into the election. So in terms of the results, can start by saying that a majority in the Danish parliament is 90 seats. After the Danish people voted, the Social Democrats remained the largest party as they would have expected with 38 seats. That's still quite a big loss of 12. And it's the worst result since 1903 in Danish politics. So pretty tough for them in terms of their relative size. The Green Left, on the other hand, gained ground, rising to 20 seats, becoming larger than Venstre, the Liberal Party that fell back to 18. The Liberal Alliance, which they have liberal in their name and there are liberal aspects of their economic policies and so on, they're quite firmly right-wing. So them and the Danish People's Party both made gains, especially the Danish People's Party that has struggled for quite some time now with a lot of competition on the far right in Denmark. They started seeing sort of significant gains again to start dominating that part of Danish politics. The moderates slipped slightly to 14 seats, but crucially, they ended up again as the kingmakers. Overall, again, neither of the traditional centre-left, centre-right, left-right blocks secured a majority. The centre-left red blocks, that includes the Social Democrats, finished on 86, while the centre-right blue bloc reached 78. So, as often happens in European politics, with no clear majority and no obvious majority, attention is currently on coalition-building options. As expected, the moderates are in the driving seat. When parties nominated a formateur, meaning the person tasked with helping them in the government negotiations and the formation process, The red bloc backed Fredriksen, the blue bloc backed Venstre, and the moderates backed Rasmussen himself. Fredriksen has been given the first attempt to form a government, so things are as they have been for a long time in Danish politics in that sense. Her initial proposal was a centre-left coalition including the moderates. However, Rasmussen rejected this, insisting on a broad government spanning both left and right, and excluding more ideologically extreme parties. So that would be essentially similar to what they have now, but with a couple of more parties joining in, essentially. He's pushing for a 5-party coalition, so with the Social Democrats, moderates, the Danish Social Liberals, the Liberal Alliance, and another party on the right just called the Conservatives. And you can say that the Social Liberals are also sort of in the sort of centrist space. So still unclear how this is going to go. Talks are ongoing. Rasmussen has ruled out joining a purely right-wing government, rejecting an offer from Venstre to form a blue bloc coalition. At the same time, left-wing parties, including the Red Greens and the Greens, have signalled they won't join any government that includes Liberal Alliance or the Conservatives. There are also reports that MPs from Greenland and the Faroe Islands could play a role in negotiations, potentially in exchange for greater autonomy. I didn't mention that until now, but Greenland and the Faroe Islands, who are part of Denmark as former colonies, they also have representation in the parliament elected. They have their own seats reserved, and they have sort of slightly different party political cultures in both of those. It's a bit similar to what you might see in Spain, where you have these very much regional players that end up also sometimes being used to draw on support to gain majorities, etc. So pretty complex picture. What you can sort of conclude from it all, though, is that Fredriksen's gamble didn't really pay off. While she remains in power for now, she suffered historic losses, and it becomes even harder to govern now than it did under this previous coalition. The results really show how fragmented Danish politics is. Voters are drifting away from the traditional parties towards smaller, more specialized alternatives across the spectrum. And you can really see that while there was a kind of rally around the flag effect, it was pretty weak and feeble. And it still seems that across the spectrum there is this sort of broader dissatisfaction. And somehow there is this sense, I guess, that no matter how they vote, there's this Fredriksen is there and Rasmussen is there. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops over time as well. Broadly, again, this isn't unique to Denmark. Increased voter fragmentation, weaker majorities, and a growing role for sort of kingmaker parties in kind of coalition politics. So, but with way more parties than would have traditionally been involved. So that's what's happened in Denmark. We'll see. Once we have a government in place, we will obviously update on that in future episodes. So now we sort of zoom in a bit more. There were German state elections in Rhineland.
In 2021 state elections, SPD won a plurality of seats, followed closely by CDU. The Greens came third, followed by AfD. FDP barely crossed the 5% threshold to win 6 seats, as did the Free Voters. After 2021, the traffic light coalition consisting of SPD, Grüne and FDP continued. In 2025 German parliamentary elections, FDP and SPD suffered major losses, with the former losing all representation in the German parliament. In the run-up of these elections, CDU consistently polled in first, followed closely by SPD, with AfD was in a distant third. The results are the following. CDU has 39 seats, 8 more. SPD has 32 seats, 7 less. AfD has 24 seats by gaining 15 more seats. Grüne are the same with 10. Freie Wähler and Free Democrats FDP lost all representation, marking a continuation of the downward trend that FDP has been experiencing as of late. Only CDU and SPD won constituency-based seats, as is the norm in mixed-member systems. Smaller parties such as the AfD and Grüne relied on the proportional party list seats. As of the aftermath, AfD, which has been steadily rising in the German political sphere, experienced its strongest performance yet in a Western state, coming in third. A potential coalition between SPD, Grüne and the left failed to materialize, as Die Linke came 0.61% short of receiving any party list votes. Currently, the most likely scenario will be a change in governing coalition, with a grand coalition led by CDU, including SPD. This is because the main parties have agreed not to work with AfD, a team consistent with national-level dynamics in Germany.
Thanks, Javid. But still quite a big milestone, I guess, for AfD breaking themselves in a bit more in the West. I know you've probably all seen those sort of crazy maps, seeing how extremely divided their support is across the...
But funny enough, Rheinland-Pfalz is probably the only one of the few federal lands in Western Germany where AfD is becoming stronger and stronger. Most of them are just disillusioned former labor class voters from the deindustrialized areas.
We will see how that develops over time, obviously. Finally, getting a bit more technical and talking about referenda, which we also like as politics nerds, there was one in Italy in March as well. So on the 22nd and 23rd of March, Italian voters went to the polls to, in the end, reject a package of judicial reforms backed by Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. These proposals, known as the Nordia reforms, focused on reshaping how Italy's justice system operates. At their core were two major changes. So one was separating the career paths of judges and prosecutors and introducing a system where members of the judiciary's governing body would be selected at random. So in terms of what was being changed, that governing body, the High Council of the Judiciary, oversees the independence and discipline of judges. Traditionally, its members are elected by fellow magistrates. Supporters of these reforms argue that this system had become too factional and that random selection would reduce internal politicking and strengthen independence. A lot of these supporters were more from the traditional right-wing parties, I guess, feeling and thinking that a lot of this factionalism was benefiting more liberal and left-wing judges. Critics against these reforms, they argued that the reforms in themselves would weaken judicial independence by diluting the judiciary's control over its own governance. There are also concerns about the separation between judges and prosecutors, and that this would shift Italy towards a more adversarial sort of American-style system, turning prosecutors into something closer to like a super police rather than a more neutral seekers of the truth. So this tension in the Italian judicial system isn't new. Relations between Italy's political rights and the judiciary has been strained since the 1990s, particularly following the Mani Pulite, or what was called as Clean Hands investigations. This was a sweeping anti-corruption probe that led to convictions across much of Italy's political class and effectively reshaped the party system. In the years that followed, figures like former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi frequently accused the judiciary of overreach and political bias. In the end, 53% of voters rejected the reforms, which is widely seen as a political blow to Meloni, who had until recently appeared to be in a very strong position domestically. It's quite crazy, the level of stability at the government level in Italy since she got elected, so I think she's credited for that as well. In terms of the fallout from this, Meloni has since distanced herself from the campaign in the run-up to the vote that already started, and she'd already made clear beforehand that she would not resign if the referendum failed. Even so, unsurprisingly perhaps, opposition parties obviously wanted to frame the vote as a broader judgment on her government. For these critics, the reform symbolised a wider populist challenge to independent institutions, raising concerns that Italy could follow the path of countries like Hungary and Poland, where judicial independence has been significantly eroded. So ultimately, it was an interesting case where at the core of it, technically, it was this very technical legal reform that was on the table, but it became much more a referendum on trust in the system and trust in the government and in the balance of power between them. Meloni did not get popular support for that shift. I still think she's in a relatively strong position nationally, but I guess some of the glow has gone, and it does show that it is possible to build or rally support against her and the current government as well, from the centre and towards the left. So an interesting development as well. And I think that wraps up our episode today, Javid, unless there was anything you wanted to add. But yeah, we've gone through a lot of information.
We will be looking forward to the results of the Bulgarian elections and just tell about it in the upcoming episode.
Yes, because as always, Bulgarian politics are very dynamic and quite wild. So
the usual suspect of our podcast.
So yeah, thank you, Javid, and thanks everyone for listening. This was Europlex Podcast, and we'll speak to you soon.